Good morning. Please turn with me to Daniel chapter 1 as we look at two titles this morning. Really, gold is the title we've used for the daily lessons this week, but 10 times literally comes out of this chapter. Two headings because gold is a way of really outlining the entire book of Daniel, understanding that it's going to change nations who were basically in control of the exiles that we've been talking about from Isaiah through Jeremiah through Ezekiel and now through Daniel. Daniel finds himself in the kingdom of Babylon, serving in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. And in chapter 2, there's going to be the famous story of the statue that has four parts: the head of gold, the chest and the arms of silver, the midsection, the thighs of bronze, and then the lower legs are the legs of iron, feet mixed with iron and clay. Most of Daniel, if not all of it, is going to take place during those two portions. The gold kingdom of Babylon, which by the time we get to chapter 5 is going to come to an end. Chapter 6 is going to pick up with that silver kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, led by, first of all, Darius the Mede. All right, that's all in the way of historical background. But chapter 1, as we have mentioned, is going to end with the term 10 times, as you saw in the scripture reading. It's not just Daniel, but we commonly call them, from the famous story of the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are all going to be found 10 times better than all the other nobility that they seem to have been brought into Babylon with. Understanding that it seems that Nebuchadnezzar, who's been given authority over the entire earth, we'll see before too many chapters, is collecting the best and the brightest from all of these kingdoms. And one of the things we will see is, even though they are collected from among the nobility, chapter 1 is going to help us understand what sets them apart based upon their character, and not only their character, but there's just a different spirit in these three young men. And with that, let's just look at it in roughly 3 sections. Why? Because sometimes I give preacher hacks. When you're under time pressure, things don't give you the chance to necessarily study as much as you like, just look at the chapter breaks you're given. And here, the ESV, the translation I use, is going to give us paragraph breaks that seem to break the thoughts down pretty well. So let's just follow those. Take it in 3 sections, and the lesson will be yours. Verses 1 through 7, though. Let's get started there. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family in my translation, and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace. And to each of them and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego, the famous names that we know them by later on in the story. First thing to understand is these young men are going to be taken away from their families. Unlike what we saw in the end of Ezekiel, chapter 48, where the sons of Zadok could rely on family. Understand, there are times in life where you are blessed if your family tradition is one of, just flat out like we talked about last week, consistency and integrity. But there are times when you're going to be called away from home. And whether or not you have gotten a start off in an environment where you can simply do what dad has done, and that's going to get you a long way along the path of life that you need to go, understand that you're not always going to have that comfort of home. And so the sons of Zadok give us an example of people whose family business was excellence. However, even from the nobility, times are coming to Israel where even those who are raised in a household where the family business is excellent, they're going to have to stand up sooner than they might have expected on their own 2 feet. And that's where we find these 4 young men. One of the things you also want to notice is it talks about nobility and it talks about royalty, but these are the only 4 names we're going to consistently hear throughout this book. And one of the things we talked about shortly on Wednesday night is we don't necessarily know what happened to all the rest of the nobility, but we do know that these 4 names continue to distinguish themselves over and over again. It's not every exile who comes into Babylon who's noticed as being 10 times better than all of the king's wise men and all of his other officials. But there was something about the cream of this crop that elevated them even above that to help God give them an additional blessing on whatever nobility they had going to Babylon. God, please be with us to live the kind of life that would encourage you to make us 10 times better than any job that anybody has for us. See, we said it before. There are times when I would hear the story of the lion's den or the fiery furnace. I'd be like, God's never come through like that for me. Only for me to realize I hadn't stepped up in that way. So why expect God to step up fiery furnace style, as our brother mentioned Wednesday night, or lion's den style, if I'm not making that kind of sacrifice? And so understand right off the bat, these are not the only exiles, but there's something about them consistently, as we'll see by the last verse of the chapter, that consistently allowed them to stand before the king throughout different administrations. Because they're going to stand before more than just Nebuchadnezzar. They're going to stand for different kings and different nations, and they're still going to stand tall. Understanding that, let's move on to the second section. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. Let's just pause there because I don't want to go too far, because that's 2 points right there I think really bear some attention. Understand that Daniel resolved in his heart what he was going to do. He was not going to sin against God. But he understood the environment that he was in was a relatively hostile environment. And understand that there are times when you might have purposed in your mind and your heart that you're going to do what's right, but your environment is going to require you to have some diplomacy. And like most things in life, we can kind of, when we get in the moment, try to pretend to be polite, or we can have what they call customer service courtesy, meaning we can turn it on and off when we need to for the purposes of what we're doing. But understand how there is a deeper level of courtesy that God willing just makes it second nature, like we were talking about before. And so even though Daniel had purposed in his mind, he wasn't going to disobey God. How do we know? Because later on when it's talking about the lion's den and the fiery furnace, how do they get in trouble? Well, in situations where there is no diplomatic way out, they're like, we're going to die. We don't care. But the question is, don't necessarily make that day come before it has to. And so what happens is he doesn't simply show respect to the king. He seems like he's in the habit of showing respect to everybody else. Understand, this young man comes from nobility, God willing. These are habits that he might have gotten into when he was dealing with his own quote-unquote servants in the nation of Israel. And so now when he's in Babylon, he doesn't have to pretend to be nice to people he's looking down on. It's just natural for him to ask permission, even of those who don't have the highest status. And so understand how that opens a door for him in an environment where the answer could easily be no. If you have somebody who is looking too narrowly at the rules, it's just a flat out no. But what we're going to find is he has someone who has basically comes from a different belief system than he does, but is reasonable and is willing to talk through the issue with him. How do we know? Keep going. Verse 10. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. Why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Understand, this man doesn't have to reason with him. He doesn't have to say anything. He's the boss. But what he's doing is he's helping Daniel understand what his concern actually is beyond the rules. And so that is one of the things, whether we are in a position of authority or whether or not we are in service. We say it all the time. That is helping us to understand, in a lot of ways, how God deals with us. He didn't have to give us the word of God. All he has to do is say a thing and it exists. But he is trying to reason with us to get us to a certain place where we understand why he is doing the things he is calling us to do. And so likewise, this eunuch, he could be like, look, these are all royals and nobles. All they have to do now is listen to me. I'm the law here. But he doesn't take that perspective. So now you have two people who seem to have a level head about their station in life. You got Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who come out of nobility or royalty. We don't know exactly which. And then you got this eunuch who doesn't take his position now over the nobility of other nations as authority as I'm just the king over you right now. There might be another king, but as far as you're concerned, I'm him. You have two people who are reasonable, and that's going to create an open door for them both to learn something as we keep going forward. 11. Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. And deal with your servants according to what you see. I don't want to stop every time I get a thought, but understand, your best evidence is sometimes going to be evidence. He could have got in there, like we talk about political season aside, the election's over. You still got job politics where you go. You can get in there and politic and try to play favorites and be the favorite of whoever is over you, or you can try to just let the facts speak for themselves. And that's what they're doing here. He's taking the time to listen to what this man's concerns are, and instead of debating with him or try to pull rank with the other nobilities, instead of trying to climb the ladder, he's just, let's see what the facts show. And it's like you hear from time to time with preaching. I'd rather see a sermon than hear a sermon any day. Talk about it all the time. I'm not going to go back over it all again, but everything I say here, no matter how well it might go, can completely be undermined 5 minutes outside of that door, depending upon how I handle traffic. You know, one of the reasons why one of these illustrations jumped off the page to me is in trying to be nice in life. We said, you got to get your heart ready to get broken. There are going to be some times you extend some courtesy. I was going to use an example from way back when I was in Pullman, and you drive through campus. Have you ever driven through WSU's campus? Don't let it be busy. I used to have folks who told me, Marcus, I'm just going to warn you, when school's in session, you might want to go around. Because it's a huge college with a whole lot of stoplights, and don't be in a hurry. But there are times when sometimes you want to be nice. You stop even when you don't have to. I'm going to guess you may be just a little bit like me. And when you're nice and you're stopping for somebody who just decides they're just going to act like you're not there, and just kind of take their time, maybe that gets to you too. Maybe it's just me. Pray for me, please. Because that was going to be my illustration for courtesy, right? Basic courtesy opens doors. But I had a fresh reminder this weekend. Well, I'm letting somebody go, and they get out in front of me, and they're like, I was like, bud, yeah. Right? Just, yeah. It's the holiday season. Just let it be happy. And so likewise, my response to that has everything to do with, like we talked about last week, that could be, I just thought about it right now. Talking about I can't control everybody's behavior. I control my response to it. And within a week, I got a chance to be tested in that way. Because likewise, even today, I can leave here and do something to completely undermine the message. Or you all could go preach a message without saying a word. I say it often enough. And those are, God willing, some of the easiest messages to preach. Why? Because if they're naturally coming out of your habits and your behavior, you don't have to write an outline, a bullet point. You don't got to pray to God for an illustration. You just do what naturally comes to you now. Because your habits are in good places. And God willing, when the time matters, no matter what condition you're under, the spirit of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel will just rise up in each and every one of us. We might not be 10 times better than anybody. But God willing, we're just satisfying God in what he has for us to do. And we just wait for him, like we say sometimes, surprise us with the blessings of a God who's basically said he can do exceedingly and abundantly more than we ask or think. Let him surprise us pleasantly sometimes, right? And I think that's what happens to these young men. They don't go around telling each other, we're 10 times better than everybody else. God just makes it happen. He just makes it so. How do we know? Verse 15, at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. He didn't have to, the debate was over. Understand the power of a life that's persuasive? He didn't have to say no more. He just said, feed us what we're asking for 10 days and see what happens. Everything else fell in the line. And so the steward takes over from there. And we've said it before. In life, you are not going to be able to be your own advocate in every room because you can only be one place at a time. Praise God to the degree you not only have the blessing of God blessing you with however much a multiple of what your talent might have been, but you impressing people so much that they want to stand up and, God willing, defend you in situations where you can't be in the room. And so understand it's the multiplied effect, where the life that they're living is not simply making them stand up in a room or the presence of nobility, but it's kind of the gospel. This is what we have right now. You see Jesus going to have that interaction with the woman at the well. Did he then go preach in Samaria? No! He impressed one woman so much that she basically persuaded an entire region. When he was having trouble persuading people at home. You can't be everywhere at once. So God willing, the things that we do will cause God to add a blessing not only to our abilities, but he will, like we say in business, say from time to time, I don't know a whole lot about business, but I did watch the founder, the McDonald's story. And I know the way they went from a burger joint to, you got what, 2 here in Lewiston and 1 over there, thousands of miles away from McDonald's, wherever it started, is because they were able to scale it. And God scales our efforts to the degree we're doing the things he wants seen. To the degree we're doing things he wants as an advertisement of who he is. We said before, when this thing says over and over again, he's protecting his name, it's not because he's bragging. He doesn't care to impress us. There is a certain thing about his character that he wants represented. And those are the things he tends to add 10 times the blessing or whatever your personal multiple might be. As long as you're simply doing the things he is asking you to do, so that we are the kind of people that he would want to exalt. Like we said, most of the prophets, every one of them had this in common. Whether it was Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezekiel. Everybody had one test. It was almost like the pass-fail test at the end of Matthew 25. How did you treat me when you saw me as easy to overlook? It's beyond that. Were you living the kind of life that was exemplary? Or were you doing the kinds of things that would make me want to make an example of you? And that's what we're getting to see right now all over again in the story of Daniel. It's starting all over again. We're getting to see the kind of young men that God considers to be exemplary. And it's really simple math. They didn't have to do a whole lot. All they had to do was show a little bit of courage, a little bit of wisdom, and a little bit of courtesy. And God added everything else. Those are the components why we hammer the issue over and over so much. Integrity, character. Those are the simple things that God is asking us to do. I said it a couple weeks ago and somebody mentioned, Marcus, you forgot the passage. They didn't say it that way. They were nice. But you've seen, oh man, what is good, but what does God ask of you? I think toward the end of the book of Micah it might be. But to, I forgot it. That's why I got to pick the verses ahead of time. I'm going to pause for this one. Please play me some Jeopardy music. Sean, where you at? Give me some Jeopardy music. I'm joking. Sorry, Sean. You've done enough already, brother. Preacher should have been ready. There it is. Micah, the book of Micah. Well, of course, I didn't send to my brother. I'm getting at that age where I'm forgetting the ones that used to seem like they were second nature. Micah, chapter 6, verse 8. He has told you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Sometimes we complicate it in situations where the recipe is really just that simple. And watch God add a blessing to the simple things he has asked us to do. If we live the kind of lives that he wants to make exemplary, that he wants to put on that light stand, as Jesus said. We're two things, as he described us. We're salt and we're light. He's just asking us to be the kind of people he wants to put on display. As we continue on, verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there, until the first year of King Cyrus. Taking it backwards, that first year of King Cyrus thing, we said it before, we can rise without integrity, but it is rare that we will be able to have endurance in anything without genuine integrity. And so understand, as we go forward through the rest of the book of Daniel, it's a relatively short book, it'll probably just be one more week. This man is going to serve through at least 3 more kings, or he's going to serve through 3 kings. And the thing that's going to tend to stand out about him is going to be not only that he himself seemed to have a lot of talent, because that's going to run real short in the next chapter. Because his talent isn't going to be able to answer the question or the challenge that the king gives him. And they're going to be sometimes we talked about how important environment is. There are going to be sometimes you're going to land in an environment where no matter how nice you are to people, no matter how well you've done, no matter what kinds of things God has given you, you're going to land in an environment where things are just not safe. It's just not, like we call it walking on eggshells, where every time you turn around, the environment is such where you aren't going to know what to say. And even if you're doing everything right, checking all the boxes, you still, landmine, I did not know. They're going to be, that's why they bury them in times of war, right? So you don't see them. And so understand what happens is there's been a breach of trust between Nebuchadnezzar and his officials in the famous story I mentioned already about that statue, where he's tired of listening to them tell him whatever it is they think he wants to hear about dreams he's told them. He's like, no, I'm sick of it. You tell me what I dreamed and interpret it if you are really talking to somebody else. And that's the challenge next time. And guess who even gets caught up in that? Daniel. And so Daniel doesn't know the issue right away. He can't. He's like, this is new for me too. And so life is going to take you to places where your talent can't carry you. And so as talented and gifted, 10 times better is not enough in chapter 2. And that is why it's so important to live the kind of life that pleases God. Because the talents, they're just a gift. It's like Christmas season's coming up. People put stuff under the tree. Might make you super happy. Is that going to solve your life? I'm guessing not. And so look at the gifts he gives us in talents. As it's like Christmas. It's a lot, but it's not enough. And part of Daniel's wisdom, beyond being able to interpret the dreams, is he understands the limits of his gifts and his talents, which is what is going to get Nebuchadnezzar in trouble back by the time we get to chapter 4. Because as many times as it goes well for Nebuchadnezzar getting a reintroduction to God, this is truly the God of heaven, you know. How do we know that he knows? Because when he freed Jeremiah, he didn't just come haphazardly killing everybody. He spared some of the prophets and those who had been oppressed in the kingdom of Judah. And so he had an understanding of who God was. But the question we all have to answer, is God really on the top spot of our throne? And that was the question that distinguished Daniel from Nebuchadnezzar. Because by the time we get to chapter 4, it's the famous story of Nebuchadnezzar is going to have to go out and eat grass. Because no matter how many times God shows up to him in a miraculous way, he's going to go right back to the same habit. It's me, bud. I did it. Daniel, however, by the time, before we even get to chapter 2, he's already seemed to have gotten into the habit of, it's not me. And here's where his courtesies kick back in. When the king is in such a heated rage that he's forgotten how gifted and talented Daniel and his friends were, he's talking about killing them too. And they hadn't done nothing wrong. But he is actually that heated. And so understand the thing that might have stepped in and bought Daniel his first request. King, give us a little time. King wouldn't even see him. He sent message through someone else. Give us a little time. It might have been that courtesy or that habit he had gotten into of showing courtesy to people whether or not he thought they deserved it that bought him the time he needed to ask his friends to pray and for God to give him the answer that he needed, which seems to be overnight for the next day. And so understand, before he really needed humility, it seems that he was practicing it. And it's just like we saw, the crops don't sprout overnight. But it seems that his humility and his kindness ended up opening a door that he never knew he would need opened. A door his talents couldn't get open because God had shut down. Because he's constantly reminding us, as he gives us gifts, he's also giving us lessons that reminds us, I say it all the time, it's a dead horse issue for Marcus, that remind us as talented as we get, there is no challenge in life that we'll get to where we will stop needing God. And so the more he keeps us in a ready remembrance of that, the safer we really are. That's why those passages that talk about in Hebrews, no discipline seems fun at the time. It's downright painful a lot of times, right? But as cheesy as it sounds, it really is evidence that he actually cares for us. And I'm watering that down. It literally says that he loves us. And so understand that as he is taking one, we already saw it, I think it was back in Ezekiel. He said that the destruction he was bringing to one of these territories was such that even if I think it was Job, Noah, and Daniel were there, they would still only save themselves. But understand, this is a challenge where without the level of character that Daniel was displaying, we don't know whether or not he gets to a chapter 2, much less 3 kings later. And so understand, some of Nebuchadnezzar's frustration, it's reasonable. It's reasonable. Why? Because he had gotten into an environment where you just know in life, I remember back when I used to work for the government, when you get to know the lifers, those who've been there for a while, they outlive administrations, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be the government. Go to businesses you know, the ones that function really well. Go check the support staff, quote unquote. They tend to know more about the organization than the people who come and go. That's a wisdom you pick up after a while. When you realize that organizations are dependent upon talent beyond what's named on the fill in the blank. And so Nebuchadnezzar understands, one of the things he literally says, the more savvy of them, those who were not necessarily gifted in talent or integrity, but had learned how to play the game, he said, I know the reason why you got to tell me the dream is I know you're just going to tell me stuff until my time's up, and you can just keep your job. Because if you've ever worked around a bureaucracy, you know how that goes. I'm sorry, that's how it is in business, that's how it is in other places. And so the king outsmarted that, and he understood that I am in a desperate situation. I need to know the truth. And so one of the reasons why Daniel is so important beyond what we've already mentioned is by the time we get further down the story, when it is chapter 4, let's maybe skip ahead to chapter 4 with me. And God willing, we'll close there. This time Nebuchadnezzar has another dream, and he's just as disturbed. Beginning of verse 1. Well, let's skip. Verse 1 is the preamble. Let's just read the whole thing. I'm sorry. Verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that made me afraid. As I lay in bed, the fancies and the visions of my head alarmed me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretations of the dream, or the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians and the enchanters, the Chaldeans and the astrologers came in, and I told them the dream. We can stop there. You know the story. I told them the dream. What's funny about that? What's odd about that? Chapter 2, he wasn't telling them a thing. He didn't trust them with anything. Now he's telling them the dream. Please be the kind of person. Pray for God to make us the kind of people who can restore trust in situations where it has been destroyed. And so that is another thing we get to see in this situation. It's not Daniel just being 10 times better for Daniel. Daniel has restored peace between the king and the wise men. It's weird that there are any wise men left. I'm sorry. He was going to kill them all, right? But not only are they still around, they're not just hanging around. He trusts them again, even when Daniel's not around. Understand what's happened between now and then. Daniel's been made their boss. And God willing, it goes beyond Daniel till he has restored a level of integrity in the quote-unquote magicians. At least whatever, if you don't know, just tell them you don't know. I know I beat that dead horse. Just don't do things that destroy his trust anymore. We talk about all the time, what are you going to do with your second chance? And so now that Daniel is their boss, it seems that he is not just 10 times better. It seems that he is setting a level of character and integrity that has completely restored the king's trust for those he formerly didn't. Yeah, he was about to get rid of, right? And so when Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, is giving us the Beatitudes, and he says, blessed are the, come on, help me out somebody, you know. Which one fits there? Go ahead, brother. Do it. The meek. What other ones fit? Blessed are the poor, right? Poor in spirit. Luke will say just the poor. Blessed, thank you, are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And so understand, like we say, these stories, when you read these shorter versions in the Gospels, they're like hyperlinks to giving us a deeper understanding of what it looks like to, God willing, be a peacemaker. It's not just nice words. It's not just fill in the blank. It's the combination of things that God is calling us to do when we simply follow the things that he's asking us to do. Over time, the 10 times better just follows. And not only will people, God willing, not only be telling the stories about what it is that you're able to do, but what seems so different about that thing that you have, God willing, the spirit that you have in you. God willing, they'll do more than tell stories, but your presence will, God willing, be able to help restore peace in places where it just, right? Restore trust in places where it, One of the things I think we all have to do as we close, though, is understand that Daniel, after being given gifts like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that made him 10 times better than those the king found in his service, is they did not turn, and this is my ad lib all the way, you can disregard all this, everything I said you're going to, but all this from here on out, because this is Marcus ad libbing. One of the things you have to do, God willing, to add value to whatever multiplication God has given to your talents, is to not then impose a double standard on everyone else. Understand that Daniel comes into a situation where he has to basically overcome a lot of hurdles. He's coming from a conquered people. They are from nobility, but like we said, they're the nobility that's now being put under the servants of the king. So whatever they were, they still got some hurdles to climb, right? And so that can put on you, well, if I had to work this hard, once I get it, guess what? But the one thing that helps add value to your talents is people being able to see consistency, compassion, and character in the things that you are doing. And so one of the things I'm convinced that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did that allowed them to endure through all these different administrations, where they refused to apply the disparities that they had to suffer. They refused to so much as make them double standards for others. And so Mama raised me to understand that there are times in life where you are going to have to be a multiple of times better just to get the same credit and respect that everybody else who's established in a place might have to get. That's just how life works sometimes. But if you let that make you so frustrated and bitter that you then go on to take on the culture of double standards, then you look like everybody else. And we said before, don't become the thing you hate. And so one of the things that we see in a king like a Nebuchadnezzar, we don't know what it is that he had to grow. He might have just been royalty from birth. But some of these kings didn't start out as royalty. Some of the toughest kings like Jehu back in Israel were the ones who had to come through the ranks, who had to establish themselves when other people had it easy. But the thing that keeps a Jehu from being like a Daniel is they ended up adopting the double standards that they had to suffer. And they treated the people like them in the way they hated to be treated when they were coming up. The thing that distinguishes character is those who can take injustice and turn it into a just opportunity for those coming behind them. And that is one of the things that I think sets Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego apart from all the other nobility that was around them. All the nobility that had status, but whose names we no longer know. And so understand in life, We may not ever be 10 times better than anybody or anything else. But God willing, however much he adds to the gifts that he's given us, we will take the character with us to know what it's like to struggle. Never forget what it's like to not have it easy, so that we can try to identify people, not only people who are struggling too, but people who have potential to be the kind of people that God would consider exemplary, as opposed to, as we say from time to time, no matter how much we love them, wasting resources on people that God, he loves and he sees the potential in. But he says, let me maybe work on that while you invest my resources in people who actually, we know, based upon, Marcus is standing now, based upon this book, they're already doing the simple things that God considers exemplary. As we together stand and sing. Your only Son.